We're doing a documentary. What? Alright, so I gotta tell you, they'll be like, he rides Seth with the FBI. My parents moved over here when I was born in 1969. It was a middle-class neighborhood. It's probably 50% white, 50% African-American. We even had like mixed-race couples. It was, a good neighborhood. And I sometimes go to Ferndale, which if you ever get a chance, the same beautiful homes that you can see, and they're small or ranch-style homes that are in Ferndale were once in the area we're about to go to right now. Around 1985, which is about 30 years almost to this date, you had a drug epidemic kind of occur in my neighborhood, and I saw where individuals who, got on what is crack cocaine, and the neighborhood transformed tremendously from hard-working families to, high crime, increased poverty, because even those who had jobs, as they saw the neighborhoods changing, they decided to move. All here, it was all clean. This woman here, she lived on this street. She just passed for 70 years. Miss Dartons. Starting here, all the way back, I could pretty much every block from here all the way back to Leavenworth, which is about 17 blocks. Unfortunately, as I grew up, it was somebody on each of these blocks who was either murdered or unfortunately is doing life sentences in prison. And this house, this is a guy, mom, single family. Yikes. Single family. He went to prison at 18. He has a sentence of 45 years, and he's done like 25 years. Got another young boy here. His grandparents live in that beautiful home right there where the dumpster's at. He has a life sentence. Down here was, once again, beautiful block. I would take my paper route and I would drop off papers from here all the way down. Right here, this is where a police officer actually lived. And he was murdered. He had hired two neighborhood guys, and he was a really active police officer. And they ended up, after working for him one night, came back, robbed him, and killed him. And both of those individuals ended up, they're doing life in prison. Well, one got out and got murdered, and the other one's doing life in prison. Even on that block where I just came off of, best friend, Tony Spivey, was murdered when I was 20. So all these things kind of, as I got into education or wanted to go into education, once again, I saw what it was like to have, a family, and also what it's like not to have a real good family or structure. So if you go from Kentucky, and I'm not going to tell you block for block, from Kentucky, which was that first block, we went all the way down to, I'm going to take you this street. I can name somebody who's either been killed or who unfortunately is serving a life sentence. So you're talking about 18 blocks, and that's on average about 2 to 3 individuals. And it's truly sad, truly sad. Truly sad. And once again, my goal, I was gonna live on my old street and I was gonna walk to school and teach. And then I rode by the school one day and it was in immaculate shape. It was one of the few things you would never believe. And then I rode by and this is what they have now at Clinton Elementary. Now you have some schools, which shows you how crazy Detroit is. You have some schools where you don't have like windows and doors and they're dilapidated. This school had windows, doors, it was in perfect condition and they tore it down. Some of it's money. I think the largest crisis is the family. So many men, I know, and I've heard it, and you get mad sometimes. It's like, they talk about the black fathers have failed, and especially the black men of my generation. I know it's been a lot of systemic issues, whether it's lack of education or employment opportunities, but many of them have just failed, and it's rough. It's a tough job, being a black man in the city of Detroit with not a lot of job opportunities. But when you had children, you had to take on that responsibility. And I think, leaving these kids out here without mothers, or without fathers has been one of the major issues. This house right here was, at one time, they used to call this the Dale. And as a kid, that house right there, and I listened to the rap music. I grew up listening to Tupac and Biggie. Love Tupac. That house would sell probably like $20,000 a day worth of drugs. So you can just see people just coming like a McDonald's. And so many boys who are in that age range dropped out of school and wanted to be ballers, which is what they used to call them. And that also, changed that whole dynamic of, being at school and wanting, we used to all want to be basketball players. But you had, once again, individuals who didn't have a dad like I had or a mom like I had, who didn't have that parental supervision, who fell into the streets, which was terrible when you look at the consequences. So when we would come down to this area, from my area back at this time, we used to look at this like this was our ghetto. So when we came down here, we almost would look down on these guys from our end of the neighborhood, because once again, even the ones who didn't necessarily have, a father, their parents had good jobs, they had, top 10 Adidas and Fila suits, but down here, these guys were just, on their own pretty much, and their moms were working long hours and they were just in the streets. And as you can see, this is what's left. So they would sit down here, and this was like another area in the 80s and 90s that was just, drug ridden. And it was hard. I can't imagine what it was like for individuals to, as even adults, to live in this area with all the violence and the drugs that was going on at that time. You don't want to acknowledge, what has happened. And this guy right here, his name was Sean Coleman. He was like the richest guy in our neighborhood. He was, that place I showed you all, which was called the Dale, that was his, they used to call it his spot. He used to make like $20,000 or $30,000 a day. And he was murdered at the age of 18. And he had like trucks and cars, and once again, life is over. And you're talking about 30 years ago. So we all played basketball. We all, liked rap music, which is similar to what you all did. But what was different than any other generation was the breakdown of the family and the violence. So when I look again and I ride through my old neighborhood, and I know, once again, so many of, and I know a lot of neighborhoods or suburban areas, and even you all probably take, you think, my friends from high school or my friends from elementary or my friends from middle school. For me, most of my friends who I went to elementary and middle school are dead or in jail. And that's what lays with me. So when I'm riding around and I see guys who are hanging out with friends, once again, I know in my neighborhood, where I grew up for 30 plus years, many of these individuals are dead or unfortunately doing long life sentences. And that's once again one of the things that always propelled me to want to go into education. Well, I love Detroit, but I know it's I don't see it. I see a lot of people who talk about it coming back. One of the reasons people came to Detroit in the first place, and my father was one who left Mississippi at the age of 18, was to come and work in the factories. And a lot of times now we look at it more like it's a vacation area or a resort type town. And the real premise is that Detroit was a factory town. And people came here for jobs and a better life. And when we lost factory jobs, it transformed the communities. We still have pocket areas in Detroit. So you have, like a Sherwood Forest, you have like an Indian Village, you have like a Rosedale Park, which is where I'm at. You have, East English Village. So you have pockets of areas, but then around each of those areas, you have this. So even when you're out and about, you still have to deal with, unfortunately, the decay and the crime. And, for you all, this might be shocking, but after you ride past it like 20 or 30 years, it really doesn't impact you. This was my middle school. This school transformed my life. Up until this time, my dad is a preacher too, so I was like a preacher kid, and I'll show you his church. A preacher kid. I used to speak at churches, and I was a dedicated here before me, and that might be where I got my accent. He told me, he said, Seth, when you get to Post, you're gonna have to stop talking like a white boy, so forgive me. Because I had a great dialect, because Post was a fighting school. And that's what I try to get related to kids I'm working with now. This was a fighting school. So this was the type of school, if you did not fight and you just wanted to go to school, you had to fight. And when I got here, when I left Clinton, I was like the class valedictorian, and I was the smartest kid in my class. So when I got here, I begged my dad, please don't send me to Post. I was about 5 feet, no, I wasn't, I was 4'11" and about 80 pounds. And he said, you're going to Post, it's 5 of you all, I don't have enough money to send you to private school. So I came, and at that time, they had jackets that were popular, and they're coming back now, they call it starter jackets. Yankees and Blue Jays, and they also had a jacket called a Max Julian. And it was a friend of mine, he was like my bully from elementary school. But this guy was the most talented, athletic person. His name was Michael Thornton. And our first year here, and I hate this, a long story. Our first year here, we're in school, and I'll never forget, downstairs in the bottom, and it had a basketball court that was and I tried to get this school before it just went into utter decay. They had a double gym. This gym was so humongous, with one of the most beautiful basketball floors you could ever imagine. But it's all in decay now. But on this particular day, we played basketball, and Michael Thornton, who was my bully and my friend, we left gym, and downstairs, and I don't know if Josh, you all had it at middle schools like this in Detroit, you had like locker room areas where you would go take showers and you would change, even at the middle school level. And this particular day, Mike came down, big kid, and I wish I had a picture of him. I would show it to you. And he came down and bumped me off of the water fountain. And I was sick of him that day. I said, Mike, I am sick and tired of you. You've been bullying me since 2nd grade. Today, we are going to fight. And I'll never forget, he told me, he said, I'm proud of you. I've been waiting on you to do that since 2nd grade. You finally showed some heart. So I'm like, this guy is crazy. But so we joked it off. So once again, he and I walked home every day. And our sisters, his sister and my sister, were best friends as well. So this particular day, we had a half a day. And we would walk home he and I would meet at this door every day, because you had gangs at this time at our school too. You had a group that was called the Smurfs. Well, they were like really short guys, and they were short because they smoked cigarettes. So it was like about 20 of them. They were extremely short. And the previous week, Mike had gotten into it with some of them, but this particular day, Mike ended up getting into a fight, and they said he actually, and I don't know this to be true, but this is how the story went. Once again, when I got out, I'm like, where's Mike? Where's Mike? He was gone. So I said, well, let me start heading home. And once again, on a half a day, you would have like 400 or 500 kids out here or more. At that time, it might have been, 500 or 600. So I'm looking for Mike, and we're walking, and they're like, one of my buddies ended up coming up to me and telling me, man, Mike's around here. He's getting into a fight. So I run, because we had to cross a bridge to get across the freeway. So I will never forget, I'm running over here once again to catch up with Mike, and Mike is in a full-blown brawl with this guy, and everybody's like, back then when fights were going, the crowd was around, so everybody was like, laughing and hyped up just seeing these two guys battle it out. And then we looked up, and it was probably about back there, probably back this way, a couple of houses back. Somebody ended up handing the guy Mike was fighting a gun. And I'll never forget, we were all standing there like in shock. And when Michael Thornton saw it, he started to run. And he ran all the way to about right here. And all we heard was boom. He was shot in the back. And then we heard another shot. Boom. He was shot in the back. And by then, he had run across the bridge. And I mean, we're like 12, 13 years old. We're seeing this guy get shot. And he runs across the bridge. And it was one of the most transformational things to ever occur in my life, because he ended up, and I'll show you the porch. He ended up running and falling out on a neighbor's porch, and he ended up dying right there on the porch. And we always thought he was 13 because he was so big. And the guy he was fighting, who he was actually beating up, we ended up finding out he was 18, and he ended up getting a life sentence as well. If you take a school out of a neighborhood, you're killing the community. What family, or even a single family, a mom and her children, can live in an area where the kids can't get to school? So when you look at schools like this, closed. When you look at Post, which was closed. Right now we're gonna probably pass about, we got one more other school where each school, when they would close down one, it would kill that community immediately. And once again, this went beyond race. These were oftentimes black politicians, for whatever reason, who were just killing neighborhoods. Right? That's one thing I learned about in Ann Arbor, that it's not always about race. It's about doing what's right. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, we didn't always have politicians who were doing what was right. Having the reflection of seeing so much that has happened, I guess sometimes you are just crazy and stay. And I guess I've been one who's been crazy and has stayed. This was the basketball powerhouse. Won 2 state championships back to back. And I left Cass, which was a prep school at that time, to come to Cooley, because this is where all my friends were at. And as you can see, we still on Finkel, which is tell Eminem 5 Mile. So when they closed it, I came up here for this one, because Cooley is a beautiful school on the inside. And I know it has ancient architecture and things of that sort. But when you go inside of it, it was beautiful. And what was amazing was that Detroit in about 1999, they had a bond go through, or that they asked the citizens to pass for like $1 billion. And this was up under the emergency manager. And as you can see, they put brand new windows. You know, they remodeled, they spent $1 billion remodeling schools all across Detroit. And then they closed them or tore them down.
So when you say that they like remodeled all the schools and then they closed them down, it was like a government thing?
It was ignorance. It was like black leadership in the city at its worst. Because as an educator, you know it's not the building that educates kids. And that's what I found in my 10 years in Ann Arbor. It's the quality of the teacher. It's the quality of the curriculum. It's the expectations of the community. A building is just a building. It has nothing to do with the success of a child's academics. And I know, you have instances where they publicize, like, oh, the toilet paper and this and that. Yeah, they had that, but that doesn't cost $1 billion to buy toilet paper. These kids needed quality books. They needed instruction. One of the things, even when I tried to get into Ann Arbor, I had a master, in Detroit, I had a master. There were 20 of us who tried to get into Detroit public schools, and they put out, we want African-American men. They didn't hire any of us. We were all hired in the suburban districts.
Why?
They didn't want teachers with masters. They wanted the cheapest, the least qualified, and once again, thinking that has no impact on students' academic success. And that's what, I was able to see, God was able to let me see, and going to Ann Arbor and saying, hold on, that's professional development. I used to love math. I loved math. When I got to Post, it was like, I loved it. And they gave me an algebra teacher in the 7th grade who could not teach algebra. Matter of fact, she started off as a substitute. And then they ended up hiring her in as the actual teacher. She couldn't teach algebra. That ruined me in algebra and then geometry, because it was like I didn't have that foundation. And that's the piece that people don't realize, the impact of not getting a good education. That it's not, even at 4th or 5th grade, that these contribute long term to a student's academic deficiencies.
Is that mic still on?
Yep.
Okay.
Open film. So, yikes. I hope you got it. Yep, so this is my house. This is where I live at right now. And my pit bull is my wife in there. Yep. So that's where I'm at. The future of Detroit. The future of Detroit. That is a tough question. I don't see it like everybody else has seen it. I see like snake oil salesmen who are, selling something that I knew would never happen. Because I would see, even after going to Ann Arbor, it was like the first time I went to New York. They used to tell, and I hate to get on these administrations because my dad always gets on me about getting on them, so I'm not going to say any more names. They would say, Detroit is going to be a world-class city like New York and Chicago and Toronto. And then I went to New York 10 years ago, and that was my first time ever going. And I'm like, Detroit can never, ever be New York. It's impossible for Detroit to be New York. There is they've been telling me for all these years that it could be New York, and it's impossible. We don't have the money here. We don't have the population. And the people who they believe they are going to attract, I don't see them coming. And I love Detroit. I don't see somebody in Ann Arbor or Bloomfield or Farmington moving to Detroit. I see it in pocket areas like this because these are kind of like niche areas. But You know, there's only so many homes in this area. You got a school right here that the lights never go out. Insane. I couldn't imagine that happening in a district other than Detroit, where the community would say, oh, we just paying DTE, you know, all night, all day. Who would allow a contractor to get away with that? So I definitely, to make a long story short, a building has, well, Detroit proves it. It's the quality, and that's once again what I realized in going into the field of education, and what has driven me is to, you know, move beyond, you know, the facade of, you know, charisma. You know, you got to have this magnificent vision. It's about education. It's about our kids, you know, having the opportunity to be creative and express their gifts, but they also need to have a sound education. So we are headed to the east side. My grandmother and them, when they moved over here, this was probably, and this is another area they're gonna be like, Federal, you're riding around with the FBI, so you all don't get it. It's another area, when my grandmother moved over here, this neighborhood was diverse. You wouldn't believe it. It had like bakeries and meat markets and stores and doctor's offices, and I mean, homes with woodwork you couldn't even imagine. And I'll never forget, my grandmother probably moved over here in around 1982, and at that time it was called Pole Town. It had a high population of people from Poland, from Ukraine, from Czechoslovakia, African American, so it was a mix, very mixed Irish. They had like bars. It was amazing, some of the things, you know, that was over here, that when you see it, you're gonna be like, no way. But I can remember when my grandmother first moved over here, one of the things they told us in integrating to this neighborhood, once again, because we even used to play baseball then, we went to the field that particular day, and the white kids who were, you know, already in that neighborhood, they told us, they were like, you all are gonna come over here and you're gonna tear up our neighborhood. And we got mad back then. It was like, no, we're not. We're coming over here. We're going to take care of the neighborhood. This is everybody's neighborhood. But I oftentimes look at over here and it's like, whew, what in the world? They were right. So we did. Tore up this poor neighborhood.
You what?
This neighborhood is shot. And I know I was so crushed a couple years ago when I rode by and saw that my grandmother's house had been burnt down. And it was like, my grandmother she was the type of woman, she would invite the whole family over. We would have Thanksgiving dinner, everyone would be there. You were talking about, you know, I knew, and growing up in Detroit, I knew my first cousins, my second cousins, my third cousins. I knew my fourth cousins. And we grew up in a really, you know, tight family structure. Once again, everybody wasn't perfect, but we all knew each other. And that's one of the things she prided herself on. So, you know, even after I left from being over here as much, I always said, I'm gonna come back, I'm gonna buy my grandmother's house and I'm gonna refurbish it. But when I saw it, I was crushed. I was crushed. As well as when you look at the whole neighborhood and community. What would you feel? How would you feel? You know where your child might have attended. You know, when you look at your investment, what do you feel about your investment? What do you feel about the quality of the curriculum? And I would get on the bus and I would, even at 12 or 13, even after going through some of those traumatic experiences, I would get on the bus, we would ride from the east side. Once again, my grandmother grew up, this is Shane, this is like one of the toughest areas in the city of Detroit. And I would come over here, I would go West Side. One area I didn't go to was Southwest Detroit. So I was pretty much East Side, West Side. But I never felt like I couldn't go in the area because of gangs or, you know, crime or anything like that. It was just out of choice. And even in areas where you did have gangs, it was nothing like how it is in Chicago or LA, where you can't go in this neighborhood because of this or that. That's insanity even to me right now. All down here you would have like bakeries and this was a charter they just closed right here. Neighborhood bars and SS Kresge's and Montgomery Wards. You would ride down here, you would smell food. Bakery here, you had like an Eastern market over here. You had a hardware store right here, a bakery right here. Once again, SS Kresge's, which is like a Kmart. Doctor's office right here. You had massive buildings right here. You had, you know, stores. And your dad knows Montgomery. You couldn't imagine the Montgomery Wards being over here. But it was. I'm gonna show you my grandmother. This whole area, this was a school right here. This was Ferry Elementary School. And they put a brand new roof. They put brand new windows, brand new doors. And then 5 years later, they closed it down.
So you think this ton of money has just been wasted?
Oh, utterly. My grandmother, once again, this house, it used to be a mixed neighborhood. Beautiful 2-family homes. My grandmother's house is right here. Hurts me to my heart. We grew up, I had 21 first cousins. Our parents would drop us off and we would play. We would go over to the baseball field. And this block had houses from end to end. End to end. You wouldn't even think civilization was over here. St. Hyacinth, where we would come up here and they would have big festivals every year. When you look at the doors and the beauty of this church, and it goes back to, once again, the people who are here, they're in Warren. Now, are you gonna leave Warren? Even as beautiful as that church is. And this was another block where you had doctor's offices and, you know, bakeries. And once again, not utter destruction. When it comes back to, you know, the education, if you have people who don't know that you should expect better, they haven't been educated about, you know, how tax dollars should be expended, you end up with Detroit. Once again, there used to be homes all the way here, all the way down. We don't get down to the brass tacks of it's the quality of the education. It's the quality of the teachers. It's the quality of the curriculum. Buildings have nothing to do, as much as we like to believe, with student academic achievement. And our investments, unfortunately, in many cases, and some of them might have been for good reasons, have taken the focus off of the quality of the education and put them on other variables. They put on the news he's gonna remodel. You see that? I don't see it. I do not see this building. And I've been riding up under here for 20 years, going to Belle Isle, ever. And this used to be like a Kingsway department store.
What's he gonna do to it?
He came and, cause I got a buddy who lives over there. He helps me do work on one of my houses. He came by and like broke the tops off of it because they were all about to fall onto, you know, the sidewalk. So they did take that off. But show me how in the world are you gonna repair that?
What's he gonna turn it into? Lofts or?
I do not see it. And like I say, call me a visionless person. I don't see it. I don't see it. I do not see it. I don't see it. But I love Detroit. But I don't see it. Like,
are you proud to be from Detroit?
That is a very complex question. It's a tough one. Because when you say it, it can bring, oftentimes it brings a negative connotation or an assumption. Other times, you know, you realize, as I have on a personal level, you know, and not to be braggadocious, how strong you have to be to make it out of some of these areas and to be doing what you're able to do in your life. So that kind of brings, you know, on a selfish level, like, man, I had to be a tough guy to make it through this. Or, you know, you see stuff on it, or even when you go places, like you'll go out of town when I was younger, and I would go like to Atlanta or someplace, and they'd be like, I'm from Detroit. Man, you from Detroit? It's like, yeah, so it's like gives you like some instantaneous ghetto street cred. But then you come back and, like I say, you know the horrific things that have occurred, which then makes you say, man, how in the world did this happen? So I guess sometimes. But it goes back once again to education. America is the greatest country in the world. We can do whatever we want to do. We can invest billions of dollars or trillions of dollars wherever we want. But for whatever reason, and we have extremely knowledgeable people across all ethnic groups and religious groups and otherwise. But for whatever reason, when it comes to some of these issues, we act like we are ignorant. We can go build hospitals in some of these other countries. Why can't we? And not saying that we don't need to support other areas of the world, but why can't we then also invest in some of the areas in America on a similar scale? I was watching, I look at some of my shirts. I bought a Tiger shirt a couple years ago, and I'm not against any group. And it said a Detroit Tigers shirt, and it was made in Pakistan. I said, now who could have gotten that job in America? And then that might have led, once again, to better economic conditions and better opportunities. So I just wonder, you know, not that it's being old, but are we doing all that we're capable of as a nation and providing opportunities for everybody? I'll never forget, I was in Dallas, and at the same time they had filed for bankruptcy, that we had also announced we were building a new Red Wings stadium, and the guy was like, how could you be building a Red Wings stadium if you're bankrupt? I told him, in Detroit we could do anything. I think exposure and prior knowledge is tremendously important. And then just identifying with someone's humanity on both sides. And knowing, you know, as I told my kids, you know, growing up in Detroit, you don't judge, and that's the Manugian. Yeah. You judge people by who they are. And I think too often when you have societies that are as separated and divided as we are, we forget about the humanity. Irregardless of where you come from, if you have had the training and you've had the opportunity to experience great curriculum, you can teach anywhere. But if you don't know what the heck you're doing, and you could be from up the street from the school, you're not going to end up being productive. And that goes back to the quality of the teacher. Penske, and they got major clout in regards to what's, and even Dugan once again, in regards to what's going to happen in Detroit. but it's about how soon are we gonna make decisions, you know, that can cause change. You mentioned it earlier, all this happened in 30 years. So what are we gonna do, you know, in the next 30 years or the next 5 years? And that's sometimes, you know, one of my challenges, even, you know, in looking at addressing even the academics of some of our kids. You look at, for example, kids in urban settings and knowing they need so much more. And, you know, it is going to take more, but it's also going to take, you know, as you say, not just always considering you need a handout, but even sometimes in the decisions our politicians have made, knowing that they made some terrible decisions. You know, they were horrible in investing $1.5 billion in new schools and your kids don't have books. So I believe in accountability for our behalf, but I also look at, you know, when we have socially conscious individuals, we want them to give back. That's one of the great things. I did a lot of reading on, like Andrew Carnegie and Rockefeller, and I looked at how, you know, those mammoth capitalist titans oftentimes, you know, at the end of their lives donated so much of their monies to charity and libraries and schools and colleges and universities. And I was reading an article the other day, they talked about, you know, the mammoth wealth of, you know, the younger generation, how they're investing in how can they live longer lives. So it's where are our priorities?
All right, so one of the other things that I was just thinking about is, because I see this in teaching too, we know that the family breakdown is going to have an impact on a student's education, where what they go home to every night. And so you'll have some people say, well, it's so important that a child has a mom and dad or has guidance, and that's great for the child who has guidance, but I think that we also have to accept some truths here. There are kids that don't have that, so let's sort of throw some of that out the window and deal with what we've got to deal with, and that's the kid that doesn't go home to a mom and dad, and even may just go home and there might be a mom and there might be a dad, but is truly going home to no one. And you made it sound very evident that that's taking place here.
Uh-huh.
And it's taking place all across America, but it's definitely taking place here.
Uh-huh.
Can we create a curriculum that will help overcome that, or should we add more personal relationship type of classes into our school system? Should there be emotional classes in our school system? Should there be how to deal with finances? Like, should we create more curriculum that will not take place? No one's ever going to be able to take place of the parent. But you've mentioned curriculum, and I agree with that. But I don't know if the current curriculum can take care of those problems. I feel like there needs to be some type of emotional curriculum, some type of self-worth curriculum, some type of curriculum where we start talking about our soul. Like,
and I agree with that you do have to look at the whole child. And then I got a whole bookshelf at home where I've looked at, on a personal level, what in the world happened to, the African American culture. And you're right, when you're looking at, and then you got the fist coming up, where you got like 80% of our households are single family. And that's something, like you said, you're not going to eradicate overnight. But what continues to cause me to focus on, the fist, Joe Louis. Yep, the spirit of Detroit, you got that? what causes me to dwell on academics so much is I had a kid, my second from last year teaching in Ann Arbor, and he was labeled as selective mute. I had never heard of that in my life. And African American boy, he was reading at like a level C in the 4th grade, which is terrible. That's like almost like 1st grade. And I looked at all, the varying pieces that had been put in place. And you're right, they had a lot of social emotional pieces, that supported him. They had a lot of, social work and school psychologist pieces that supported him.